Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining. Just to be clear, this webinar is being recorded and will be sent to everyone, and so you can obviously watch it again. You can share it with your colleagues, and anyone that has to dip off early for any reason, you can catch up on anything you missed. Everyone who's joined as an audience member, you're automatically on mute. But there is a Q&A and you have the function to ask a question throughout, and there'll be the opportunity for us to answer any of those questions at the end. And we'd love to answer questions and take questions, so do feel free to engage that way. And feel free to engage throughout in the chat. It's nice for us to get a sense, well, for us to be reminded that there's people there and to sort of get a sense of what you're thinking. We'd also love to hear from you in the poll, and get your views that way, so please do so. And at the end we'll be doing a roundup of some of the resources we have available, and some of the resources that we have coming soon. So that's just my sort of housekeeping bits and pieces done first of all, and then I'll hand over now to Amma and George, and I'll do a proper introduction of myself on this slide. I think that's best.
Thank you, Leonie. Good morning, everyone, and good morning to those more especially that were listening and are able to hear our working from home scenarios and situations about cooking, which we won't repeat or go into detail, but happy to have a discussion about it later if it's suitable. But yes, welcome, and it's so glad to see everybody from across the UK, but also more so, I think I saw someone from Warsaw, so good morning to all our international joiners too. My name is Afrifa-Tchie. My pronouns are she and her. I head up the people team at Mental Health First Aid England, and I'm head of people, wellbeing and equity. And my title basically says exactly what it says on the tin. I look after all people matters internally, but I'm also responsible for our wellbeing and equity as well, both internally and more so equity stuff around inclusion and our race commitments, again, both internally and externally. My background has predominantly been in culture space, more so around culture, wellbeing and inclusion. I've worked for a variety of organizations and a variety of industries as well. So you will see on our pictures, we have my whole self tags to identify who we are and what identity is. And for me, I'm a huge Marvel geek, a fan. I'm very much into animation and cartoons. I think I'm very much a big kid at heart when it comes to stuff like that. I'm a foodie lover. So for those that did hear me earlier on, whilst I might not like to cook so much, I do love to eat. And I love traveling. I think the world is much more wider than our doorstep. And it's amazing if we can, or when we get the opportunity to travel again, to explore as much of the world and different cultures as we can as possible whilst we're on this planet. My superpower is dyslexia. So I am dyslexic, but I do see it as an advantage and a superpower rather than a disability. So that is me. I will hand over to our guest today, George, to introduce herself, and also what her my whole self tags are.
Perfect, thank you, and good morning, everyone. It's so nice to see everyone joining and actually take the sort of space to talk to you all. So I am the Occupational Health and Wellbeing Manager at the NCA. It's a post I have held since August last year, but I've been working in the occupational health and wellbeing field for almost 5 years now, so it's certainly something that I enjoy, and it's definitely grown as well in terms of what is asked of us. In terms of my role at the National Crime Agency, it's obviously that. So the NCA, our main focus is to lead the UK's sort of fight against serious and organised crime. I won't go into too much detail in terms of the actual company itself, because that can all be found on our website, but just a bit of context, that's kind of my background and where I work at the moment. As Emma said, we've got our tags on the screen, so you'll probably see the top one, I'm an introvert, so if you do hear me wobble a couple of times, bear with, I will go over, I promise, and I'll relax into it. I'm also a twin, which is lovely. You're never alone when you're a twin, but I do also have an older sister as well, so can't ever leave her out. And I also love to bake, so very much of a sweet tooth, and it's always good just to kind of get in the kitchen and relax and do some baking, why not? And I'm also Disney obsessed, so I echo Emma's thoughts there in terms of being a Marvel fan. It's probably the best thing ever. So thank you. I'll hand over to you, Leonie.
Thank you both so much. So hi, I'm Leonie McIlroy. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm head of campaigns and communications at MHFA England. So part of my role is to lead on the My Whole Self campaign. I am a mum, and those of you who joined us a little bit early will have possibly heard me saying that we are just finally today exiting isolation. So I am very relieved that whilst I love being a mum, I'm very, very relieved that neither of my children are in the house today whilst I'm trying to work. So that is a bit of a blessing. I definitely talk too much, so apologies. I will try and rein it in. I'm a Spurs fan and a Londoner. And I love to ski, although it's been a little while since I've been able to do so, a combination of COVID and children, I suppose, but hoping to do a bit more later this year, so that will be exciting. So yeah, just really excited to be here today, and yeah, hear from George and Emma in a bit more detail about My Whole Self, but also just loving seeing everything coming through on the chat. So yeah, loving that you're all sharing a little bit about your whole self too. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Leonie. Yeah, and I'm loving seeing the chat as well and the engagement that's there. So please do keep it coming as we go through today's webinar. So yeah, mainly George and I will have a bit of a conversation around My Whole Self, and we've got some questions that I'll be asking George, but also contributing to. And as Leonie said earlier, please do ask your questions because we definitely want to hear from you as well. So in terms of what My Whole Self is about, I'm sure there's some of you on this call that probably are familiar with our campaign. It's our campaign for workplace culture change. You know, we're calling on all organizations to empower employees to bring their whole self to work. I think it's a really important thing to think about what we say when we say bring your whole self to work, and what that means, because it'll mean different things for different people. And also it's about having the space and creating the cultures where people opt in to want to do so, as opposed to what we're finding more so frequently in this day and age, where a lot of people are deciding not to, especially those from marginalized or racialized groups, because of fear of social safety or anxiety in that space. So we're really calling for organizations to think about their workplace culture and their values and what that really means. And actually, rather than it just be a tagline of bringing your whole self to work, what does that authenticity around that really mean as well? So we'll be getting into that a bit more as we move on in today's webinar. You can get involved this year by joining our in the celebrations. It's we launched actually in 2020, correct me if I'm wrong, Leonie. Yeah, 2020, at the height of the pandemic, when we were basically told to basically work from home. And we really had to think about what that truly meant. And I think that's actually was a bit of a blessing in disguise, because we had sort of what the campaign meant in one way, and then suddenly had to think about it in a whole entire different way. Very proud of this campaign, so do get involved, and Leonie will share the resources with you later of how you can do so. But it's happening on 18th of March, as it does every year. As I said, we shouldn't have to hide parts of our identity at work. And if we choose to hide them, it's because more of a positive reason than a negative one. So wherever you're working, you know, you should feel comfortable in bringing your whole self to work, and actually think about it. It's better for well-being and better for the workplace. And particularly for those organizations that are thinking about it from a hybrid model, but also more so those are thinking about it from a 100% remote working model, what does it really mean for your people and your culture to make sure that people feel a sense of belonging and they can bring their whole selves to work, whether it's on screen, off screen, or in person? Bringing together diversity and inclusion with mental health and well-being drives positive transformation in the workplace in terms of performance and mental health. So again, thinking about when we're talking about people plans and when you're talking about business plans and everything else to do with your business, and essentially well-being and inclusion should be at the core of everything that you do. So that's the website that you can go to think about how to get involved and actually get more resources around that. If we can get to the next slide, please. So my first question for you, George, is what attracted you to My Whole Self?
So I love this question, because when I was sort of thinking about it, and I was like, oh, I really want to sound like I work for MHFA England here. And honestly, this is my reflections on the campaign itself. So with the campaign, what for me really stood out was actually how simple it is in its core message. So the whole purpose of being able to be yourself at work, I think is quite telling that actually MHFA England are calling on that culture change, because clearly people feel they can't in whichever environment they work in. So yeah, for me, top one was actually the clear and empowering message that it is all about being comfortable in being you in the workplace and really embracing that. And also managers, colleagues also embracing that too and encouraging that going forward. Again, a reflection from myself here at the NCA, we do have a number of different strategies and people plans, like you just reflected, Emma. So the way we're set up is our health and wellbeing team, which I manage, is separate to our diversity and inclusion teams. So with this campaign, it sort of bridges the gap in a sense, because it does look at D&I, but it also looks at health and wellbeing. And I think sometimes we act in silos in teams when we really shouldn't. And this type of campaign just brings it all together, and it really allows us to sort of reinforce those messages and different parts of both strategies that we are trying to achieve. Again, I also really liked it because honestly, it helped us raise our profile of our mental health first aiders. So I should have said in my introduction, but I'm also the coordinator for our mental health first aiders. So here at the NCA, we have 77. We've grown steadily since we introduced them in November 2019, so pre-pandemic times. Yeah, and we sort of have increased that number of them. But we found that particularly for the cohort who trained during COVID, officers in our agency weren't quite aware of who they were and what they did, what their role was. So by sort of springboarding and launching with this campaign, we could also sort of raise awareness of our mental health first aiders too. So yeah, I kind of used a lot with this campaign to really sort of highlight, promote, raise awareness of the network, but also its core message too. And then one last thing, because obviously I said I love this campaign, within our wellbeing space, and I'm sure others as well on the sort of call who've joined us do the same, we do mark a lot of international and national awareness days, whether it be Black History Month, that was in October, World Mental Health Day, National Inclusion Week. So again, the core themes of this campaign really tied into each of those. So I appreciate we didn't sort of launch it with us back in March 2020 alongside yourselves, but we did it ever such a slightly different way. But because of its tie into other national and international sort of campaigns, it made sense to do so. So there was a lot in this campaign that really sort of spoke to us as an agency, and we decided to take it forward.
Thanks for sharing. I think there's some really important things that you said there that definitely resonate. Whilst 18th of March is our, I guess, celebratory day, it's very much around what does the rest of the 365 days of the year look like. So, you know, even if you're not starting on the 18th of March, it's actually whenever you start, is thinking about what does that look like and how you pivot thereafter. I love some of the things that you shared around thinking about it from the whole holistic approach, and we'll talk about mental health first aiders a little bit later. But I think if you do have if your organizations do have mental first aiders, it's again thinking about how you integrate into everything that you do with them. But if you don't, again, it's how that plays a part of the wider holistic approach when you're thinking about your culture, your values, and your well-being. From a perspective, Mental Health First Aid England always advise around looking at it as a whole piece rather than an add-on. And I think that is also quite critical when we're thinking about My Whole Self. It is not an add-on, it's a whole piece. People don't, you know, it's a whole piece in the sense of we're multiple identities, we're multiple things in terms of who we are and how we identify with. It's not just kind of pick and choose whenever we want to. But unfortunately, some workplaces have created those environments where people have to either cover or opt in or opt out to who they are and who they truly are being. So it's very much around the authenticity piece, what works for you as an organization, but also what you need to change. So I think my advice on that is it's great to share best practice and to see what other organizations are doing, but in essence, what really works for you that will actually get people bought into and believing that you truly want to change the workplace culture that you're currently in, or actually enhance it to be better if it already is. We can go to we've got our first poll. And if I could ask, I thought we did have a poll, but that's mine. Sorry, my bad, let's go to the next question instead. So the next question that we have here is, what have you done to embed My Whole Self at the National Crime Agency, which kind of talks to the point around the authenticity piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just reflecting on your comments there, Emma, about sort of that, what happens for the other 365 days of the year. It's not just sort of you launch it, you say goodbye, that's it, you're done with this type of campaign. So the sort of word of embed sort of makes it sound as if we're fully integrated and embedded with this, but what I would say is that we are at the start of our journey. So we have only been going since September in terms of actually really raising awareness of this campaign in the agency. So in terms of sort of the way we've launched it and what we've done today, I thought it might be quite good to sort of talk through that, and then definitely sort of jump on any reflections too. So in terms of our approach, as mentioned, we are sort of drip feeding this throughout the year. So we've done our launch, and that launched in September by our Health and Wellbeing champion. So for those who aren't sort of too familiar with civil service terms, it's our deputy director, but that's sort of looking at just under CEO level, basically, for other organisations. And that for us is really key. So actually, from the outset, we had senior leader buy-in, and we really had a champion who was aware of the sort of overarching health and wellbeing mission across the agency. So I think when we talk about authenticity and senior leadership buy-in, for me, with a campaign like this, it's always so sort of key. So actually, officers, employees at whatever level know that this has been taken seriously, and actually they can feel comfortable to bring their whole selves to work because sort of someone senior has told them that they can as well. So that was really lovely. We had some good response to that. And then, as sort of mentioned earlier, it was really nice that we transitioned into October. We had Black History Month with the theme of Proud to Be, but also World Mental Health Day as well. So we really challenged our mental health first aiders to actually use this campaign and others that were out, sort of raise awareness of it, hold tea and coffee mornings, desert island disc sessions. We had one team who set up like a desert island shack, which was amazing. So they had blow up palm trees, and they really created that environment and that space. We had bake sales going on. So there was a lot of creative ideas out there, and it wasn't just a sense of, here's a resource pack, read through. They took little nuggets and they really made it work for them and their teams, which was great. We had also done, as I sort of mentioned earlier, about sort of raising awareness of who our mental health first aiders are. We've done a My Health Selfie page. So the way we work is that we have an intranet. So within that, all of our mental health first aiders have a little picture of themselves and a very short bio as to who they are, who their whole selves are. And not only does this kind of raise awareness as to who they are, but we also found that by sharing their whole selves, some officers who might need help or just want to have some sort of support from that listening ear, that there'll be some resonating parts. For example, if a mental health first aider has children and someone else is also sort of feeling, you know what, I actually need someone to talk to about these issues I'm having at home with childcare or some additional support, then there's that sort of, I suppose, match in a sense, and that they think, do you know what, I'm going to go to this person because they might truly understand sort of what I'm going through, which is wonderful. And then just sort of conclude on this section, we recently held a CS panel, so that's a senior civil servant panel, so very senior leaders across our agency, where they came together with Simon Blake, CEO, and they actually spoke about what it means to be the whole selves at the agency. So that was great because it was so specific to us and to the challenges that we are unique in facing as being the National Crime Agency, but also sort of overarching, again, senior leaders talking about it, revealing parts of their whole self that not many of us knew either. So that was really lovely too. I'll pause there, there's a lot, and we're definitely sort of ongoing with plans the rest of the year, but yeah, it's an exciting time, I think, for this campaign for us.
Thank you for sharing, George. And I think what's been great about listening to you is that there's the fun element to it, but there's also the real element to it. And I do think that when it comes to campaigns like My Whole Self, you definitely have to think about both sides. Not everything necessarily has to be always serious all the time, but I think there also has to be that, come back to the thing about authenticity, there's the realness in it. And I think what's also really interesting is when you say, and I wholeheartedly agree that, you know, there's everybody. I believe, and I'm sure I don't share this alone, but I believe that when it comes to well-being and inclusion, we are all personally responsible for the part that we play in that. Yes, leadership has to steer and show direction and role model. And as an employer, you have a duty of care to your staff and your people to show that well-being and inclusion is very much at the forefront of everything that you do. But equally, as peers and colleagues, you have to also do the same. It's very much around how you interact with your peers and colleagues, from your behavior to the way you think around it from an equitable perspective, but also just how you share and just are considerate and empathetic towards people. So I really love the idea that even with the ideas you shared, it wasn't just one group or one person leading from it. It was everybody getting involved in a different way. And I also think we have to bear in mind that, you know, what My Whole Self means for a leadership team will be very much different from, you know, the different levels in your organization. So again, it's how do you learn from each other and how do you create those spaces to enable people to share what being their whole self means and sense of belonging means in their workspaces, so people can really contribute to either creating a really really good holistic, really good kind of culture that embeds well-being, as well as inclusion, but also the decisions that are not made in silos, as you mentioned before. So, you know, it's not just a kind of like fancy feel good campaign. It really is thinking about what is the culture you have now? Where is it that you'd like to take it and where you'd like to be, and actually who you get involved in, whether at different stages, to make that happen. So if we can go to the next question. Oh, actually, no, it's a poll. Got it all wrong, go the other way around. So let's have a poll and then we'll go to the next question. The poll is, how confident would you feel to check in on the mental health of your colleagues? Give it a couple of, people are already going into it. Give it a couple of minutes before we get the results. Okay, we've got about 83% have participated so far. Just conscious of time, so I'm going to end, oh, we're almost there, 88%, but I'm probably going to end the poll, and if we can share some of the results. So yeah, which is actually really positive. Apologies for those that didn't get opportunity to participate, but I'm really conscious of time and I want us to have a really good conversation as well as have questions. So actually, yeah, we've got a huge percentage that are confident, which is great to hear, 62%. Somewhat confident, 37%. Again, that's absolutely fine. And we've got 1% that's not confident. And I think the people that are somewhat confident, again, like I said, that's actually quite fine and realistic, because as Georgia, you pointed out, you know, there's exciting times ahead, but again, there'll probably be challenges along the way too. So it's how you navigate through that. And I think also when you are dealing with people, it's always very much a differentiation in kind of feelings and just how people approach certain things. So I think, you know, being confident is absolutely great, but not being complacent in that confidence is equally as important, because like I say, you know, when you're dealing with people, when you deal with culture, it's not stagnant, it's ever evolving. So thinking about, you know, if you are confident, how can you continue so you're not complacent is quite key. And also if you're somewhat confident, how you then think about ways to build your confidence so that you are in a place where you feel, again, that you're able to actually really make a difference within the cultures that you are in. So if we can go to the next question. So what has the experience of My Whole Self been for you and your organization? You've alluded to some of that, but if you could elaborate a bit more or just add anything new or different, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. So personally, for myself, sort of actually taking the idea of the campaign, its inception, launch it with our network of mental health first aiders, and also having sort of that senior engagement around it, it's been really good. I think it's definitely questions of, like we referenced earlier, actually, the core values of the campaign, what its purpose is and why we're looking to do it. And it is all about that sort of workplace culture change. So from that perspective, it's been really good. And it's also sort of given us a space to actually go back to those strategies and to those plans and to pluck out some key core parts of it and actually look to meet it with this campaign. Again, as sort of mentioned earlier, what really sort of highlighted for me was the senior buy-in for it. And actually they were really behind the campaign and its whole sort of idea of it, that actually, yes, we have to encourage our employees and our officers to be the whole selves at work, because not only is it good for them and for their teams, but they're more likely to stay, retention, it's better for business, isn't it, essentially, that actually they're in and they can be their whole selves. So from that perspective, yeah, it's been really, really positive. I suppose it's also good to kind of weigh up with sometimes the challenges that we've had. So it hasn't always been sort of easy, smooth sailing at all. I think, as much as probably others on the call experience as well, that we are going through a change in terms of our whole conversation around mental health, how much we disclose and the way we open up anyway. So we are definitely sort of much improved from where we were a few years ago, I think, as sort of the whole nation is in respect of talking about things as they are. But that for us, I think, is probably still one of those things that we're looking to seek to challenge, to overcome, is actually how do we continue to have these conversations and to open up. I mean, even just reflecting on your poll, that was amazing to see so many people were confident in having those discussions, but we still find now that actually line managers do need that guidance and that support in having often difficult conversations, even if it's a sense of someone's usually quite bubbly, open, and then actually a couple of days they're not. how do you approach that without sort of saying, oh, you're off? And it's also that terminology around it. And I appreciate sort of going slightly off on a tangent, but it's about recognizing someone when they're not quite themselves, or they are presenting differently, that actually, how do you challenge that? So I think from that perspective, we still have that to work on and to improve and change. But overall, yeah, it's been a really good campaign to sort of enable us to really start those conversations and know where to go next as well.
Thank you, George. I mean, we definitely advocate wellbeing check-ins and mental health first aid England, and actually get opportunities to connect with people. And I've just been seeing in the chat, just, you know, we've got such a variety of people from not just only different industries, but also different sectors. So some that are actually looking more focused around school and education. And so it's not just about the workplace. I think the beauty about this campaign is wherever you are in whatever industry, you can make it work for yourself. And I think it's really important to think about, you know, someone mentioned that it's difficult to do it when you're working from home. We all have to be proactive when it comes to inclusion and well-being. It's quite easy to default to say things are difficult. And like I say, I'm not saying that it isn't true. Things are really difficult sometimes, because when you're having to balance, for example, some people in the workplace versus some people working from home, virtual versus in person, it's how do you really make sure that you're engaging and connecting with those people in the different ways, but also creating a platform, as I say, or a space to make sure those voices are heard. So you have to be intentional as you are creating, whether it's, you know, whether you're designing, you design for inclusion, you know, so you're, whatever it is you're designing for, whether it's programs or whatever, it's ensuring, again, thinking about the equitable question around how equitable is this, and actually what is the majority of our people will it impact, and how will it impact our people in that way? And the only way you can do that is to ask and sense check your people with your people to help actually design and co-design, as I like to call it, these opportunities. And I agree with you around the whole thing around our line managers, or as I like to call them, people managers, especially because they have to deliver their day-to-day, and they also have to be operational in what they do. And often, sometimes what we do is we piecemeal with them. So rather than thinking about what does it mean to be a line manager and a people manager, what are the skill sets you require, and how do we upskill them so it's actually integrated in their learning and development, we keep bolting on these things on them and expecting them to just kind of cope with that. So I think, you know, they are very much the true champions when it comes to checking in on well-being. And I always advocate about getting to know your teams well as people managers, and also understanding the dynamics of your team will definitely help with the whole thing around sense of belonging, and thinking about how you allocate work, for example, and just different things around that. You know, we have our overall arching culture in organizations, but within teams and also within the departments, there's subcultures. And it's making sure, to your point, that it's not siloed, that it's still connected to the overall arching values of the organization and what that means and what you're trying to accomplish, as I say, with the whole entire mothership. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's really important that regardless of what your role is, whether it's a senior role or a junior role, it's understanding what the need is and necessity is around being a real leader and an inclusive leader in that, to ensure that people do feel that they can talk to you, that you are authentic in that. And I know I keep using this word authentic, but it is actually true, because authenticity, again, is subjective for different people. But I think the trust element is key to all of this, whether regardless of what you're looking at from an inclusive or a well-being perspective. So thank you for sharing that. Can we go to the next question? So we talked about mental health first aiders, because I do think they play another huge role. And I think when we're looking and thinking about organizations, like I say, they are definitely key people, as I call it, or key stakeholders that actually do hold the gauntlet in leading and how to change culture. We've talked about leadership, we've talked about line managers and people managers. So now let's talk about mental health first aiders. What role have mental health first aiders taken during the campaign, and how have you supported them in that role?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just actually reflecting on the point you just said about sort of people getting to know their teams and know them best and know what works. So with our mental health first aiders and the way we're set up, and they're all dotted in different teams and business areas across our organisation. So we often come together, and myself as a coordinator looks to facilitate that as much as I can. And it's so interesting when they sort of feedback different things that have worked for them, and actually different things that might not have worked, where one mental health first aid has done something different. For example, myself in HR, I'm also a mental health first aider. It might be a sense of, I'll put on a bake sale, everyone loves it, takes 10 minutes out, has that sort of engagement and chat. But for someone else in a different team, they might be really busy and so they can't have that. But instead, an email blast is sort of, take 5 minutes, read this, it's some funny snippets or whatever, would really work for them. So I suppose it's about the mental health first aiders actually knowing what really works for them and how they can support and encourage this campaign within those teams. But in terms of the sort of role that they've actually taken and how I've supported them, so yeah, what I really like to do is actually give them space to come together and be creative and have thoughts as to what can be done to sort of enable this campaign to be taken forward, or what they can do to look to reduce stigma of ill health and mental ill health in the workplace. I also do a sort of lot of signposting, I'm not afraid to admit it, and also plugging the resources that are available on MHFA England's website, particularly with regards to the My Health Self campaign. So I believe, and I'm sure again you'll cover it off, but there's a really big resource pack, and there's so many ideas in there about different bits and pieces that can be lifted and shifted and tweaked and work for teams. So for example, I know there's a sheet in regards to a panel. I took that for my senior leaders, but someone else or another mental health first aider also took the same idea, but did it on a much smaller level, and it was on a local basis. So they really do just kind of lift, shift and tweak on what works for them. So yeah, in terms of sort of what role they've taken, a lot, they've really gone out there, been true advocates of both being a mental health first aider and the campaign. Yeah, and I've just sort of encouraged every little bit of it, to be honest. It's been quite lovely actually, just in the sense of saying, yeah, this is your space, go for it. And yeah, just sort of encouraging them as much as I can.
And I think the word that comes to mind listening to you, George, is about empowerment, but also supporting those that are doing the supporting of others. I think it's really essential, and you've mentioned it in what you said around just making sure that there is a support group for those that are supporting others, and there's a support groups where they can come together as peers to support one another. You know, I didn't mention HR because I think by default, HR is always led by people. And I'm a firm believer that, from my view, HR should be enablers and supporting people to do so, because often the default does fall with HR to manage and do everything. And I kind of understand that, but I think there's different roles in which HR can play where they also empower the business to take the leadership stance around that. But I do think it's very critical when you think about mental health first aiders, how you're supporting them. And I think signposting resources is also a great way of building communities, again, where they can talk to people about how they're feeling and the support that they need. But also coming back to your point about not working in silos is how you connect mental health first aiders with other support groups in your organisation. So diversity networks, if you've got them, or ERG groups, how do they come together to help from that inclusive perspective, as well as support from that wellbeing perspective? So, you know, there have been some really great examples you've given, and I'm sure that the attendees on this call are definitely kind of writing down some of the ideas and sharing some of the thoughts amongst each other. I'm literally seeing pop-ups every now and again in the chat group, which is brilliant, about the engagement that's going on. If we could get to the next slide, please, that would be great. Also, there's question Q&A in that time, which is absolutely brilliant. So I think I'm going to have a look at the section to see. But again, George, I want to thank you for sharing what you've done so far. It's really good to just hear what other organizations, and an organization like yourself, for example, are doing. And I think, you know, no matter how big or small, it just makes people think about what that might look like in terms of their own journey and what they can take and use from that. So I'm going to go to questions at the moment and see if we've got any. Okay, so George, I've got one for you. Okay. What do you think is the main purpose of a mental health first aider at work, and how can we engage others to use them?
Perfect. Right. Can I answer this in two ways? So I'm going to slightly ever so bypass this question. So I actually think there's two main purposes of the mental health first aider. So one of which is actually to really draw upon those skills that we learned in the training. So being that first line of support if needed, being that listening ear, being able to engage with those who approach us in a sort of self-service model, for want of a better word, who really do need that support and additional help. And because you're a colleague in the workplace, you understand maybe more than, say, an employee assistant might in terms of that programme. So I think that's key in terms of their role as a mental health first aider, a little bit similar to like a physical first aider. They're deployed, they're there, they can always be approached. But I also really see it key as just sort of 50-50 split, that their role is also to challenge stigma in the workplace and to really promote sort of positive well-being and actually opening up discussions around mental health. I think for so long it's just been a sense of, okay, yeah, we'll pay lip service, this is mental health, okay, here we go. But with mental health first aiders, they can really touch on that and draw on that and encourage those conversations and engagement on sort of the ground, I suppose, in a sense, often, I think. Certainly when I have discussions with my network, it's a sense of, yeah, wellbeing's always on the agenda now in team meetings, whether it be weekly, monthly, sort of annually, it's always there. And I think even for us, that's such a change that it is front and foremost. As part of these sort of formal work chats, we are talking about wellbeing on that level. So yeah, and then there is another part. So how can we engage others to use them? I think just raise awareness of who they are and what their role is. Always sort of just say, yeah, put yourself out there and just sort of highlight who you are. Sometimes I think for mental health first aiders, it can feel a little uncomfortable in a sense of, oh, I'm doing it again. I'm sending emails, I'm not getting any response. But just think, if one person knows who you are and they contact, that's got to all make it worthwhile. So yeah, I think that's really key for me, is to their role.
I definitely think I agree with the engagement pieces, and it's around how you find ways creatively to introduce and profile who your mental health first aiders are and how they share their stories of their experience. I always find storytelling a great way to just bring people around and just make people want to listen and hear about the experiences and stories that people have. So, I definitely think that whole thing about not just visibility and profiling where people can go to and find out who they are, but listening to the stories and hearing the stories could also encourage people to want to become mental health first aiders themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the next question, which I think is for both of us, but I'll let you start and then I'll add on, is how do you help integrate mental health and diversity awareness in any working environment that is very stuck in a particular way?
Oh, that is a brilliant.
That's a good question, right?
Isn't it just? For me, I suppose it's not about trying to change everything all at once and doing it now. I think it's so important that actually we challenge why that environment is stuck in a particular way. What can we do to sort of start to unpick that and how? And I think for every organisation it will be different, but what can sort of be slowly brought in to enable those changes to start to take place? That's a brilliant question, I'm not going to lie. Emma, I'll give it to you because you can probably do a lot better in terms of the way I just tried to approach it.
Yeah, I think maybe adding to it, the starting point is, understanding why they are very stuck and what is actually keeping them in that place. I also think that data is a very good friend of yours in this situation. So it's gathering the right data and correlating that data with causation. So thinking again about, if there is definitely evidence there that your culture needs to have a predominant shift when it comes to mental health and diversity or inclusion as well in this perspective. The question is where are the blanks? Where are the points where that, you need answers to? And again, gathering those answers are about involving your people. So, if it is, for example, one group specifically that feels that way, it's how do you then engage in the conversations to turn that around? If it's leadership that is not entirely sure, again, it's how do you use via whether it's surveys or sense checking through different groups and types of ways where you can get feedback. Feedback loops is actually really important in this case to understand whether what you think is happening is really happening and how your people are feeling, whether that's how they really feel. And so in order to mitigate that stuckness or to get them unstuck is to gather the data that really tells the story, both from obviously a numerical perspective, but also an anti-Delta perspective that showcases what's going wrong, and also thinking about the employee life cycle. So again, if you are hemorrhaging staff for a reason, what are your exit interviews telling you? If you're hiring, whether it's retention, there's always different pinch points and touch points where you can look into that the data tells you that if you continue this way, you'll either not get talent that you need, or you might become obsolete as an organization. So it's questions like that you really need to think about when you're creating your work environment. And actually that's the starting point where you engage people in the conversation. And then there's the authenticity about the real lived experiences of your people within that. And surely if you have all this data gathered in those different ways, you can't but not change your culture. If you truly are about people and you truly are about survival of your business, you're going to have to do something different when it comes to that. So that's how I would say you integrate it. And once you've got the data, again, I talk about co-design, is how do you create change? You know, often enough, sometimes we work in silos where you go off, not necessarily just HR, but sometimes leadership too, when you go and you make decisions and then you come and display those decisions to your people and you wonder why they're not buying in. So again, it's around how you do that co-design so that it's integrated where people feel part of it and actually will then buy into actually doing it as well. Just conscious of time, we've got so many questions coming through now. It's so hard to pick which questions to ask, but let me see if we've got, how does someone feel able to speak up when their manager is the problem affecting their mental health and the business is micromanaged by the managers? I've interviewed on behalf of someone who felt hemmed in by constructive management, even though they had taken mental health training. Some managers don't want to be shown up as unable to manage mental health of colleagues. It's quite a long question.
It is, and I suppose there's two ways of looking at it. So there's a sense of actually the manager fully understanding what there might be there in terms of the mental health training and actually how to have those conversations and how to broach it appropriately. But also on the flip side, so how the colleague feels able to sort of start these conversations if something is affecting their mental health. I think, as I referenced earlier, there still is that sort of piece around actually having sometimes what we class as an awkward or a difficult conversation, because it's something that's not just about sort of day-to-day work and the to-do list and what needs to be done. But if something is bothering so much that it's really affecting their mental health, how do they sort of start that conversation? I'm sure MHFA England also have a guide in regards to that and sort of how to start that and the conversations. And actually it can just be simple sort of saying, do you know what, let's have this open, honest conversation, find the space and the time. I think often we just got 100 miles an hour and we don't ever take the chance to stop, breathe, speak to teams, speak to managers in that way. Yeah, I suppose that's my input on that one.
Yeah, no, and I think for me the input is very much about, you know, even though, and this is the thing, it's like even though people have taken up the training, doing the training and actually dealing with it in real time are two different things. And I think where people feel that it's really hard to talk to their line managers, they should look for other ways to get the support they need. And often this either comes in through talking to a trusted peer, again, talking to HR, or talking to one of those line manager peers, if they're line managers peers, if you have a good relationship. I always say, don't feel trapped in thinking that the line manager or the individual that you report directly to is the only person that can help support you through this. I always think about looking for the allies in your organization to help you support that. And actually, if it's a mass thing where it's actually a majority of line managers, then the question then has to be intervened as to what the expectation of a line manager is and how you support them so that they know that as part of a line manager, you have pastoral care to your team. So you also need to think about your management skills and how you are an inclusive manager in that. So it's two ways of actually sorting that out in terms of the line manager responsibility, but also for that individual never to feel stuck that if they can't speak to their line manager, they can't speak to anyone else. I do think that there are other avenues to actually express how you're feeling that also might intervene in how the line manager manages that, and then subsequently supporting the line manager to do better in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got a couple more questions. Do you think that sharing some personal, really positive stories or stories can be authentic as sharing a difficult experience? Can this be a starting point to introduce my whole self, which is often overlooked?
Absolutely, Andy. I think that is inspired. Yeah, I really do. And so often we focus on the negative, right? But positives can be just as powerful, if not more, particularly if it is in regards to, say, mental health, for example. And actually there is that positive space, there's the outcome, and it just is inspiring. So yeah, I think 100% on that one.
I agree. Yeah. I think it's all about, you know, this campaign is all about opening up, and positive stories can be a great way of doing that. So one of the things that works really well with the selfie is, you know, on the day you could be posting that on your own internal channels, obviously putting my marketing hat on, you'll also post it on social media too. But that's a great way just to share snippets of who you are. You saw with the examples of us at the beginning, and then I can see already what it sparked in the chat. So that's a brilliant way, and that could be around positive news stories. You could put some positive thing or something you're feeling positive in. So they're all there to be adapted. And getting that buy-in again from kind of senior leaders can massively help. So getting those people to be sharing their positive news, I think, can really give permission for other people to get involved. So I really love that. Really love that idea. The resources and the concepts are all there to be tweaked and to be used in a way that works for you and your organisation. And George has done a great job of that with the NCA. Really, the point is what's going to work for you and what's going to work in your culture and for your people. So yeah, definitely pick and choose and come up with new ways to do it.
Yeah, there's actually one thing that I'm not going to share it necessarily because we're about to pilot it internally, and actually it's going to be employee led, which I think is again a fascinating thing. Is as part of our education sessions, we're looking around wellness sessions and wellbeing sessions, and that is again sharing stories about wellbeing. So I think definitely having that positive spin really helps, because often you do get stuck in the void of the negativity. And again, it's not to take away from the realism of that negativity, but giving people hope, I really think is important. That hope that you know they can strive and they can get past it. Hope that they are able to deal with it. Hope to just acknowledge how they're feeling and it being okay. But then it's not always going to last forever. So I think those positive stories and those positive news actually help with those situations and those life stories that people are experiencing. And I think the more and more people hear about the different stories, the more they don't feel alone. And that's, again, the key thing that's come out a lot about this pandemic, that people feel isolated and alone and that no one is going through their own experiences. So to just even share that and share where you are in your journey, whether you're in a better space or you're still getting through it, but you're getting through it, is very helpful. So yeah, absolutely agree. Just conscious of time, and Leonie, do let me know if I'm running to that point where we're running out, please. But I've got here a question. Georgia said that around 77 MHFA first aiders at NCA. So I'm interested to know how many total staff you have that these MHFA aiders support.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got a head count of about 5,500 at the moment. We are steadily increasing that in terms of overall head count, but yeah, that's how many they sort of service, for a better word. With our mental health first aiders, we do always say that it's an agency-wide resource. So yes, they might sort of sit in particular teams or business areas, but if anyone ever needed that support, they can reach out to any mental health first aider. I'm a keen advocate of getting more, but again, it's always just about sort of funding, seeing it through, making sure that actually there is additional support for me as the coordinator to be able to support them as well and give them that space. So yeah, that's how many we have.
I think Chloe asked the same question as well, so I think you've answered Chloe's question too. And the next question I have is, and I've got two actually, but the next question is, how do you manage adhering to confidentiality versus sharing experience information within a team for open, honest sharing? So yes, I think it's what's the balance between someone confiding in you confidentially and how you share those experiences openly within your team to enhance open, honest sharing?
Yeah, so if I talk about the sort of way we work at the NCA in terms of contacts that our mental health first aiders might receive. So if a contact is received, I ask that the mental health first aider lets me know, quite short, just in sense of what's the key theme, whether it be stress, anxiety, depression, whatever it is, where the signposting took place as well. And then I can sort of collate that data. So going back to your point now about data is often king with things like this. So I collate that data, sort of summarize it, and then I'm able to feed that back out into my network. So with that, the mental health first aiders can then go into teams and sort of say, okay, well, key highlights this sort of month, for example, number of contacts in regards to depression. Let's have a conversation around that. Let's start the sort of discussion. So it's about sort of taking the information you have, making sure it is actually fit for purpose, and then sharing it in that way. So I would never sort of go into depth as to what, for example, someone with depression is really experiencing, why it has come about, but actually how can we sort of take the data we do have and encourage conversations around it. So I hope that sort of answers that question in that space, I'd say.
Yeah, no, I think it has. And I think for me to add on to it, I think that, yes, if you're doing it kind of I don't want to say generic approach, but if you are doing it that way, then yes, it's good to gather data where you are not identifying individuals. for me, it's key to understand that anyone's lived experience is not your story to tell. So you have to be really, really conscious of that. So if it is around, team intimacy and building honesty and trust within the team, where you want the teams to open up. Again, if you're a people leader or someone that's experienced it as a people leader, starting with your own experience opens up a lot of room for people to want to share. And also remembering that they might not want to do it the first time round. They might want to wait a couple of times before they're open to share. So I think, again, it's creating that whole setting, I want to get rules of engagement or agreement where you understand that the area that you're sharing is in a safe space, and that you share what's happening, and then people kind of come round to it. So I think it's definitely what you're saying in terms of the, just kind of holistically sharing stuff and saying, let's talk, these things have been identified. What are people's thoughts on it? Versus actually thinking about the whole experience of your team. So if you want to have more team sharing, it's creating that environment, which might take time to, where there's trust for people to share. But as a team leader or a head of a department, it's sharing your own experiences first, so people can get comfortable and trust you to want to share their own. But the key thing is it's never your story to tell. So again, it's making sure that that confidentiality stays that way. I've got probably a couple of more questions, and I'm like, I don't know which one to choose because we've only got 2 and there's so many great ones. Let's see, I've got one here that says, what would you feel is the best way to launch and promote My Whole Self within the workplace to gain further company-wide engagement and integration to company culture?
Amazing question. Leonie, do you want to go first with that one? Then I can jump in after.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a couple of different ways you can approach it. Is the reality that the point is picking the event or the action that you think will work best for your organisation. So George and her work at the NCA, they tied it in with other kind of activities that were going on just ahead of World Mental Health Day. They launched by kind of encouraging their MHFAders to be sharing selfies, and there was obviously lots of comms going out at that time. I think using the selfie tool more widely and encouraging all of your staff to kind of share your own selfies on your Teams channels or your whatever, your intranet or whatever different systems everyone has can be a great way of doing it. I also think kickstarting with a panel event can be fantastic, but actually George, they did that slightly further down the line, and that also worked really well because it gave them an opportunity to kind of engage more people, and they got the leadership buy-in. Other people might choose to launch with something softer, such as the Desert Island Discs event, and that's a really, really simple idea of just encouraging people to share, their favourite music. And I think it's come up in the chat. Music is such a great one, and I was actually talking to George about this the other week. We have a weekly MHFA radio show, and it's honestly, in terms of encouraging people to bring their whole self to work, it is one of the nicest things that we do, and the chat that goes alongside that, and just what you learn from hearing different people's music can be fantastic. It could be that you instigate a book club. So really, and I'll talk you through the resources at the end. It's really just identifying which ones do you think is going to work for you, what capacity have you got, or what capacity have your MHFA network got to do that, what leadership buy-in can you get, and then identifying that, and then just building. You don't have to do it all at once, and we kind of, we're not encouraging everyone to do all of these activities on one day. The point is they're there to be done over the year, they're there to be used by organisations, but also by MHFAders themselves. It's a really lovely way to be introducing yourself. It's a nice soft touch way to get to know your people and the people, your colleagues that you're supporting as well. So yeah, basically I would say pick anything and just give it a bit of time and thought and energy, and then you can go with the rest of it anytime. There's not one specific thing that is the thing that will kick it off.
Yeah, and I think I do think that trial and error is also something. You don't be afraid to try things, and if they don't work, try something else. So last question, which I'm going to ask all 3 of us, I'm going to kind of amalgamate into one because there have been some questions about psychological safety. But I've got a question from Simon, and then a question from Belle kind of brought into one. And the question is, hi Georgina, how is the mental health first aiders time funded in their support of their colleagues? So Simon is a mental health first aider within the MOD, and this is an issue that they have to overcome. And then for all of us, I think the question is around what actions have you taken to have the best impact on increasing psychological safety at work? Which I also think Leonie plays to some of the resources that we've got that help support that as well.
Perfect. So in response to Simon, so when we expand our network, when we get new mental health first aiders in, we do run quite a robust expression of interest campaign, and that's really to make sure that anyone who does want to put themselves forward is really clear actually what our expectation is of them, because we are sort of funding their training and we are looking to support them as much as possible. So we do say that up to 10% of an officer's working time is to be spent dedicated to mental health first aider duties, for want of a better word, but within that I mean actually them having that space, protected time to engage with being a mental health first aider, to have those conversations with colleagues. And as part of the expression of interest campaign I mentioned earlier, we do ask for line manager and senior sort of manager sign off as well. So they're really clear that actually they are freeing up their employee and their sort of officer to give up their time to become a mental health first aider. So in true transparency, we have had a number of mental health first aiders who've actually had to withdraw from their role in the agency because they can't give that time, because they are too busy in their day job, and it wasn't foreseen at the point when they actually went through the training. So it's something that's always so key, and it always came out of my training for me, is that you can't ever pour from an empty cup. So it's so important for our mental health first aiders to look after themselves first, recognise if they need to take a break or if they don't have that time and they step back. We always say definitely you can come back if you do have that time and you are willing to sort of go for it again. But yeah, for us it's about making sure actually the expectation is quite clear, and that's sort of how we run things. But I'm happy to pick that up offline with Simon. I appreciate you in the MOD, so I'm sure I can get contact details somehow.
Thank you, George. I'm going to hand over to Leonie to talk about the resources, but really quickly on the point about increasing psychological safety at work, Belle, I think it's everything that we've mentioned in this conversation. You know, I think it's very much about creating those safe spaces where people don't feel threatened. When you think about psychological safety, it's very much based on trust, that people think that whatever I share to you, whatever I share, I will not be penalized. It will not impact my career. It will not impact my relations with my colleagues. And I will not be seen in a negative or wrong way. So creating those spaces is very much around those spaces of safety where people can have the conversations and feel free to be trusting enough to be able to say what they're saying. But equally, once people do divulge how they're feeling or do share their lived experience, that it's actioned. So it's not just words people are expressing. If they're expressing something that they're experiencing in the workplace, how do you then make sure that you then take that and change your culture or change whatever the dynamic needs to be to enable that person to feel more safe? You know, it's around the conversations that you have and how you lead by example. These are different, we're running out of time. So these are just a couple of things about how you take action on that. But it is very much, and being consistent and compassionate and leading with empathy when you do that. Because what people almost look for is, how long is this going to last for, or is this real? So it's actually creating those environments, whether it's in safe spaces, but also taking out so people know, again, come back to the equity piece, that, you know, that it's not just, it's a firm-wide or an organization-wide stance that you're taking. And also thinking about what your zero tolerance policy might look like in terms of how you lead from education right through to, you know, to disciplinary if needs be. I know we're literally at 2 minutes, so I'm going to hand it.
Emma, this is a whole webinar, and this is absolutely your bag. So I feel like you've got this, and we'll sort this out another time. But the point is, you can't start from zero. So just starting to get to know your people, which is what, you know, some of these activities encourage, is exactly it. So let me talk you briefly through some of the resources that we have available. So everything you need to get you involved in My Whole Self can be found in our campaign toolkit, which is at our website, My Whole Self. You can see the link there, but we'll be sending you all of this, don't worry. We really encourage you to share your My Whole Selfies on social media on the 18th of March using our hashtag, of course, but I also encourage you to share them internally, because I do think that gets a lovely buzz going. You can download the My Whole Self MOT. That's not something we've talked about too much, but I'll come on to it briefly, because someone who was asking in the chat around, do you have a wellbeing check-in that you use? This can be it. Do think about organising a My Whole Self activity to bring you and your colleagues together. And if you're looking for something to do on the day or something to promote, potentially as a soft touch way to kind of get to see if there's interest in it, you could encourage your colleagues to join our next kind of My Whole Self webinar, which is more of a celebratory discussion, kind of conversation with some interesting people to kind of explore what bringing their whole self to work means to them. And also keep your eyes peeled, because we do have a new toolkit that we're launching this year on the 18th of March on My Whole Self Day. So last year we launched the My Whole Self MOT. This year we're going to be launching a talking tips toolkit, which will give additional kind of tips and guidance to have to kind of considering those supportive conversations, how to set it up, how to facilitate it, how to listen, which is as important as how to talk, more important, in fact. I have to remind myself of that sometimes. And then also how to signpost people. So that will be coming on the day. So keep your eyes peeled. We'll be sharing that on our social channels, on our website on the day. And I'll just run through some of the resources that we have just to give you a glimpse. So if we can move on to the next slide. So here's the MOT, as I spoke about. This is a phenomenal, easy way. You can share it with your line managers, obviously give it to your first aiders. You can use it yourself, but you can check in on your own mental health and others by using it. So really, really encourage it. It gets so well used, and I think it's brilliant and it's easy. So push it out there if you can. Next slide, please. And these are some guidance specifically if you are working. Some of you talked about, you know, how do you create these environments when you're working from home. This is a whole guidance document on how to support your mental health, but also the mental health of your team and your people when you're working from home. So that's a really useful piece there that can be shared also with colleagues as well. Next one, please. And then finally, we also put together some resources on supporting people of colour and Black colleagues. Recognising, and this touches of course a little bit on the psychological safety thing, but recognising of course there's more than bringing your whole self to work than just staying connected and doing desert islandist activities. But you know, lots of people, particularly people of colour and Black people, have to hide parts of their identity at work. So we've committed at MHFA England to becoming an anti-racist organisation, and that involves kind of building a culture where people feel valued and safe. And this enables people to focus on their job, and it boosts productivity through innovation. And that's true for My Whole Self in general. So there's fantastic resources there. And the toolkit itself, I think next slide, please. I think that might be it. Spread the word, of course. I shouldn't forget this bit. This is my job. This is where I get measured on my success. Please spread the word. You know, share on social media. We've got loads of different graphics that you can utilize. You can share these internally with your staff. You can pop it on your own channels. And just show your support, obviously using the hashtag #MyWholeSelf. On the 18th of March, we tend to get a nice buzz, but as I was saying, it's not just about, as we've all said, it's not just about one day, it's about how you use these different resources throughout the year.
Yeah, thank you, Leonie. And I just want to say we also have launched a race equity report, which is also on our website, around our journey to becoming an anti-racist organisation, which can also help you around the My Whole Self campaign. So please do download that and read that as well. So without further ado, all I have left to say is thank you so much, George, for being our guest today. Thank you, Leonie, for all the support that you've given us to put this campaign together, this webinar together, and also Abby, who's in the background but you can't see. Thank you again for helping us, and thank you all for taking the time to be part of the conversation in this session. We hope you found it really useful. There'll be more details coming about in the next webinar and where you can access all the resources that Leonie just shared, and also we will share this webinar as well. So all I have left to say is thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful afternoon and the rest of the day, and we'll probably see you soon.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, thank you.